it is starting. But for anyone who happens to be listening to this, we were talking about some things just a little more casually, but I feel like it's important to discuss, and I really want to talk about the whole issue with things in like the acting world in terms of race. Something that a conversation I had earlier today, which I told some of you about, was people saying that white actors are getting a bunch of hate for trying to play ethnic roles, but black people get to play white roles, and it's not okay. And I brought up the point of there's a major difference between a role that is traditionally cast as white, but it's the character's race has no defining part of the plot or the message story, versus a white person trying to play a role such as Seaweed and Hairspray, when the entire story is about the segregation of black and white people, and it doesn't work when you're trying to when you put a white person in that black role. And as we were talking, like, I gotta say it again, especially for anyone who happens to be listening, the fact that a corporation as big as Disney cannot cast people for their parks that are the right ethnicity as the characters that they're playing is ludicrous. There are pictures that I have shared before of this woman who played like Rapunzel and Anna, like this white woman, playing Princess Jasmine, of this white man playing Aladdin who had his face sprayed orange and his arms are still white. It's there's no way to excuse that, especially considering Disney has the potential to reach out to so many different people of color, and there are so many people of color who want to work for Disney, and so there's no excuse for casting a white Mulan. Especially, like, as I said, they have Disneyland Tokyo, and, like, while they're, like, they could bring people over and they may be Japanese, it's at least a little bit closer than a Caucasian woman with, like, giant eyebrows to make... It's just so insensitive, and imagine how this looks to, like, a little Asian girl who goes to meet Mulan and she looks up at this Caucasian face. Especially when Disney talks about, like, representation, and there's only, like, that one character for Asian little girls to look and say, that is me. Not, this could be me, but that is
Was
like, who I am.
Was the orange face international, or was it in America?
It was, I'm pretty sure that one was Disney World. I'm pretty sure most of these pictures came from Disney World specifically, but it was, like, used to talk about, like, how it happens at, like, several parks. But I think it happens, different places, but I know for Disneyland Tokyo, I've seen casting calls where they're cast in America so that they can send them. And in those casting calls, they'll have specifically, like, what they can and cannot be. And, like, for Gaston, like, they say it can be any race, but then there was one for Aladdin who they specified. And the fact that a casting call can specify it, but they still cast people who aren't, is really absurd. Yeah. But yeah, also, for you guys who weren't here before, one of the things I talked about was how Disney handles their movies, and how, like, Princess and the Frog was just their way of going, here's your black character, because when you watch that movie, the characters are pretty one-dimensional. They don't do anything with these, like, characters that they did in movies such as Frozen, which I know is, like, a really overplayed movie and everyone's tired of hearing about it, but, you know, the first movie did a good job of, like, creating these complex relationships with characters that are very real. But they didn't do that in Princess and the Frog. It was just kind of like, well, here's some black people and they're doing, like, a little bit of soul music, and that was it.
Yeah, we didn't mention this earlier, but, like, also just the weird, like, ahistoricalness of it. Like, they're like, this is 20s Louisiana, and yet everyone's totally cool. No one cares about, like, Tiana doing things, except for, like, the two businessmen who are the bad ones, the racists. No one else.
Like, as great as it was that she had that friendship with that blonde girl, that's so unlikely in the 20s.
Like, if they were gonna do the friendship with Charlotte, her name was, like, maybe try to address it a little bit, how weird it might be.
Yeah.
You know, like, do something with it.
Like,
Explore
don't ignore,
it.
like, the truth behind what black people were facing. That would have made the movie, like, infinitely better if they did address that, and through all of that, she still pushed forward for her dreams. That would have added, like, so many more layers to the characters without really needing to add anything else other than just the truth of what they claimed the time period was. But then, like, on the other hand, then they'll have Moana, which, like, people are like, oh, it's such a predictable movie. Sure. But the whole beauty of it is that they had so many people providing insight and guiding it to make sure that the culture was, like, true to what they were basing it off of. Like, even the mythology behind it with the demigods and all that stuff was very true to what they believe. And another example I just thought of was, like, Black Panther was infinitely better in, like, culture and everything like that than Princess and the Frog could ever imagine to be, because they didn't like make caricatures out of it, which is great, because now that I'm thinking about it, that alligator character in Princess and the Frog was very much like the old Southern black man, and it's just and but like Black Panther just had like a variety of different personalities and all this stuff within the culture, and like it was so natural. Like their clothing never like stood out, and no one ever commented on it, made a big deal about it, but it was very true to like how it is a fantasy country, so of course there's like a little difference to it. Like I'm sure no African country has like a giant suit that like puts on with a necklace, but the style of even the suit itself was a little influenced by that. So it's crazy that like for some reason they can do it with that, but they don't do it normally. And when they do it, they just make it to be like, hey, we did it. Like, look at this, it's so great. It should never be put on display that much. It should be just natural. It should be as normal as if we watched a movie about like the French Revolution, and we're just like, oh yeah, they're French people. But it's not.
I don't remember if Jorge or Steven said this, but attesting to Black Panther, the big thing with making it a fictional place is then it gives you the leeway to explore the meshing and mixing of different cultures. We talked about how Mulan, claims it's Chinese, but then you have these elements. I believe, Steven, you pointed this out, all these elements from other cultures and just mashed together and then try to passing it as one. While in Black Panther, it's interesting, when that movie came out, there was some criticism, I'd say. I don't want to overinflate the issue for something being larger than it was, but there were critics who said, you claim that there's no diversity in these other movies, where's the diversity in Black Panther? But if you look, there was a ton of diversity, because you had Kenyans, you had Nigerians, you had Ethiopians, etc. And the big reason why it worked, you may have had bits here and there from those different respective cultures, but because they made Wakanda this, almost fictional place, it wasn't saying, oh, this is Africa, or this is Kenya, or this is whatever, and then have to run into the exact same issues that you would if you were doing it with, say, Mulan.
I would argue that like Avatar: The Last Airbender is very similar in that, in which like each of the different nations have like a different. I believe the Airbenders were based off the Tibetan monks, but they all like kind of were the same place, like it, and the cultures like were respective of each other. But they explored it so much because like it was this whole fantasy world where like you could move a rock with like your mind essentially. Going what I said before, this person and I earlier had this conversation about the whole like white people trying to play black characters are getting in trouble, but black people can play white characters. And an example they put up was White Chicks, which I really need to clarify, especially for people listening to, why White Chicks is not an example of them doing that. White Chicks was made to mock blackface. That's part of its entirety. Is so many like even like a lot of popular actors have done blackface. Robert Downey Jr., for example, Judy Garland, and that was okay back then, and it's not. It was so incredibly offensive. So White Chicks was made to show the absurdity of it, because they're like, well, what if we flip the script? But the way the movie does it wasn't them mocking white people as a whole. When they first meet the white characters they are imitating, the whole thing is I think they're acting like such stereotypical like white girls, so they're like, okay, this is weird. So when they have to impersonate them, they act like that, and as they're hanging out with like their friends, whatever, and like seeing their lives, they're seeing all this like really ignorant stuff going on, and they start calling it out. Like especially in terms of like how they look at and treat the black community. And that was part of it, was like them going in and being like, hey, like keep a bit more of an open mind. Even and I read an article about this, which is like something not that I didn't think about when I first watched this movie, was how Terry Crews' character was also with this like stereotype that they were making fun of like the black man who like tries so hard to like fit in with like white people and like just loves their culture so much and like wants to be white, like almost like if you guys have ever seen the Boondocks, that one guy who believes he's a white man who was like,
Oh, Uncle Ruckus.
yeah, it was exactly along those lines. Like it's supposed to be satire in a sense, but a lot of people don't understand that because they just want to look at it at face value. Because, and like I don't want to say like all white people, but like a lot of white people have never had to think about that, like how ignorant and insensitive it would be is if I like bleached my skin and then pretended to be Mitt Romney on a stage, like how incredibly insensitive that would be. But that happened to black people for years and was seen as like good. Like there were actors who were praised for doing that, for like buffing out their lips and slapping makeup on their face and like laughing as they shove watermelon into their face on stage. That was seen as like great acting and like true art. So it's just that difference of like it was used to make a point. It was not black people trying to like make fun of white people. It was showing you how absurd absurd blackface is, and blackface still happens. There was that one person arrested who like was mocking protesters in blackface. So I think people need to go watch that movie again. Actually, one of the other things we discussed that I think is very important, and it's important to discuss to like make very clear what I'm saying when I say it, is hiding messages of Black Lives Matter or trans rights or what's happening to immigrants right now by posting positive messages. Marcus brought up this like great point of like people can live their lives and people can take a break from it. You don't need to force all this stuff in on them because it is very heavy stuff. But what I mean when I say like don't hide it is that I've had people directly tell me that they're posting all this stuff so that nobody has to look at these things. Like they're purposely trying to hide what's going on with all these people sharing information. There are people posting pictures of them and their black friends at the beach from like a while ago and putting the Black Lives Matter hashtags that when someone scrolls through Black Lives Matter that shows up. But that's blocking so much like vital information. If you don't want to look at Black Lives Matter, if you need to take a break, don't look at it. Like you can turn off your phone. You don't have to scroll through Twitter. And if you want to, then you have to be willing to accept that there are going to be these heavy things because they're important and need to be discussed. At the same time, you can't like, you don't have to stop living your life. Like, I was mentioning how a teacher I used to have, she's very vocal about everything going on and her support of it and sharing as much information as she can. But she still posts pictures of her child because she loves her child and she's cute and wants to show her off. But she's not doing it so that people don't look at these other things. And that's my biggest pet peeve about that. And I think even people who have good intentions are doing that. And they need to realize that it's not good to hide it, because to hide it is exactly what happened when people told Kaepernick to stop kneeling. They're trying to silence him and like not let this message spread. And that built up tension to get to where we are now. Yeah, I just wanted to put that forward. I didn't know if anyone like had any similar experiences with that, or like on the flip side of like, this is a good thing that people are doing. But I feel like it's really important to discuss because we're not going to make any headway if we're not willing to talk. Like change can't happen if everyone shuts down each other, which I feel like is happening a lot.
I
No, go ahead.
scroll through Instagram and people are posting like photos of them having a fun time, a nice time, just going out and doing stuff. And a lot of that I'm like, okay, because like, yeah, we can't force, like no one's forcing anybody to suddenly give up their lifestyle to go and promote something else, because that's not the point. It's that you could still have your lifestyle, but also acknowledge not everyone has the same opportunities that you have simply because of your color. And so when I scroll through Instagram and Facebook, I'm like, okay, yeah, I could like that post. And then I could also like the posts that are supporting a cause. And it's interesting because like, as I scroll more and more, I also see corporations posting stuff. And I'm like, okay, do I also, I make a point not to like corporations on my social media. I just like, that was a general rule I made for myself, because I was like, I'm going to have social media to connect with people, not to just be mindless. So it's interesting to see that corporations are putting their foot in there. And sometimes you have to wonder, are they doing it to be supportive, or are they doing it so that their stocks could grow? And it's kind of sad. I have to think about that.
For me, it's been very clear as to whether or not they are or not. Because, I mean, we all know Ben and Jerry's is not doing this for their money, because they were very direct from the get-go. They're out there protesting. They were arrested. We already know that, like, they take in ex-convicts and pay them, like, $16 an hour or whatever. They care. But with some others, it's, like, hard to tell.
Even in the case of Ben and Jerry's, I would just say that even so, like still kind of be wary of like them, how they like promote themselves. Just because like no corporation is like a perfectly like like forward thinking and woke organization.
Yeah.
Like with Ben and Jerry's, even though yes, I 100% support like the advertising, or not the advertising, but just the statements they made in support of the movement. It's also like you guys still use underpaid farm labor for producing your product, and so I'm not saying don't eat Ben and Jerry's, but I'm just saying like
don't blindly
think about that
them
critically and don't blindly follow them, because they're still a corporation.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, they're profiting off it. They had the one flavor called Justice Remixed, and so and I think they use cinnamon and chocolate ice creams and whatnot, and so they're still doing things. They are one, their home base, I guess you call it. They're founded up in Vermont, so I've been to their factory and stuff, and it's been, since they've been started, they've always talked about the history and how it's inextricably tied to social justice. So their intentions are definitely a lot more well-meaning than a lot of companies that are a little late to the party. But again, it is a corporation. They are a company for profit. I mean, it is what it is. You're going to, at the end of the day, people are going to make their money. So, but at least you could say, at least they're making it in a way that's at least trying to guide some change.
Yeah, they're definitely worse companies to support.
Indeed.
It's the problem of like, there's always other problems to fix, but are they actively, when they are aware of these problems, are they actively trying to do something about it, or are they just only focusing on the ones that happen to be popular at the time?
I do want to pose one question. I have to head out soon, but I do want to pose one question on this topic. So we talk about how there's companies, and I know Kaepernick was mentioned in terms of how he was initially tried to silence and then, allegedly blackballed. That's up for debate from the NFL. But it's interesting because we've seen a lot of companies who initially had their stance or were soft or silent on this, and then 2016 and past years, and now suddenly they're trying to make rights or amend policies within their company or show that they're serious about change. Now, I don't know if you saw, but Roger Goodell has mentioned, he's the commissioner for the NFL. He said recently in an interview that he encourages a team to sign Colin Kaepernick. And for me, and initially it's like, oh great, they have changed, they're willing to give Colin Kaepernick a shot. However, then it makes me realize that there is also a catch-22 that this puts Cap in, because then you realize there's say a team gives him a contract. Now because all eyes are on it. It's going to be seen as a very much like a social media play or like a PR play where it's going to bring their team a lot of attention. Some of it will be negative, but it'll also be a lot of positive feedback from that. But on Cap's side, now it's like he's being a pawn in a PR play, or he could refuse knowing it is a PR play, and then his critics that already criticized him in the past will say, see, it wasn't about football for him at all. He was just trying to get attention. When he was offered a chance to play, he turned it down. And so my question here is it possible whenever you're trying to right these wrongs or reverse history, is there a way that could actually be negative in its own right? And if so, what is the right response to that, even if the intentions are well-meaning?
I think there's absolutely ways to do it wrong. It's, I think it's very much like that issue of like making sure you do it the right way and not doing it the wrong way. But also the issue of doing nothing is very prevalent when you talk about gun control. Because right now, nothing has been really done about that. But it's because people are like worried about doing something and it failing. At the same time, nothing is ever fixed if you don't try something, realize why that's not working, then come back and fix it. I think with stuff like, especially with like what BLM's talking about, it's gotten to the point that like, if you try to do something and it goes wrong, I don't think it can make it worse. Because trying to fix it, like saying if they were to hold police accountable, at the very like least, the cops could still get away with it and they're just still not doing it, but they tried to do something. So then they look back on that and say, okay, well, what can we do to just prevent it? With Kaepernick, I don't know everything. Like, I don't know that much to do with like NFL and stuff like that. One of the things that like bothered me about the whole PR thing was like how Nike handled it, because I thought Nike was straight up using him too as like a PR play to get Nike some credibility. But I think if it were me in this position, I would take it, because it would at least, it has the potential of inspiring other people, because one person alone won't make that much change. Like, he was just trying to raise awareness of it because he can't do it on his own. Of course, there's going to be like problems with saying yes or no, but making the decision, you can then fix those mistakes that happen on that, backtrack, consider what happened, and move forward. But just not doing anything because you're afraid of making the wrong choice is going to be worse, because these problems persist and build up and get worse. Because it's very much what happened with the police brutality, is nothing was done, so it just kept growing and growing and growing, and now it's arguably reached its head. It's reached its peak. So that's just how I view it. It's like, at least try to sit down, figure it out, do something.
If you hold on, life doesn't change. You know, you have to take those steps to get to the next point. Because if we keep doing what we've been doing, history is doomed to repeat itself. We have to try, we have to take every single step, even if, okay, so I'm a big proponent that even if it's because of ill intention, if it pushes the movement forward, the net positive is worth it. You have to take every opportunity you get to make a difference in this world. Like, there are bad people that are going to take advantage of your good heart and those good intentions, but if you stick to it, like, we can actually make a change in the world. If enough bad people agree that doing the good thing, the right thing, is the PR positive way to go, then eventually people are going to think this is the good, right thing, no matter what, even if it's for the wrong reason. It's like, of course, like, I'm not saying that's the best case scenario, but I'm also saying that it's better than what we have right now. You know, like, in the case with Cap, I think taking that, like, that position, any position on any team, it sends a message. You know, it sends a message that even if it is just for PR, like people will hear that message and people will say like, okay, like he's back. Now what? You know, like what's he gonna do with that position? Is he gonna play? And what are people gonna do when he kneels? If he kneels again, where is this going? You know, if you stay standing in the same place forever, you don't take any steps, you're just gonna see the whole world pass you by. We got to start moving with time. And that's what America's not been doing for years. We've been stuck here with our feet in the cement, and it's drying. You know?
I think another thing to point out is with this whole thing is why this scenario came to be. A lot of people are waiting for the reaction and not thinking about why he is now in this position. Because if people have a problem with him kneeling, no one has looked to the reason why. They just try to stop him from doing it. If people had focused on why he was kneeling, if they took the time to be like, well, let's see if we can address it, fix it, or even see if there's a problem to begin with, then there would be no reason for him to kneel. There would have been no reason for him to be released. And I think it's the same thing here. He wouldn't need to make this decision between being a PR pawn or not. If these problems that we're all trying to persist, or like that people are trying to get benefit and money off of, wasn't here. Because then companies couldn't ride out the BLM wave and try to make more money off of it if there was no reason for BLM to get this far, like to grow this big. It's a lot of just waiting for something to happen and then judging the reaction instead of looking at the cause and making sure that that's shut down. Because these protests wouldn't happen if, for instance, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor's, and George Floyd's killers were punished from the get-go without needing all these protests for them to even consider it. It's all about the reaction. People didn't pay attention until we reacted. And it's the same thing with Kaepernick. I think people are just waiting to see his reaction, as opposed to thinking, well, he shouldn't have to like make a decision that ridiculous, where it's like kind of negative for him, no matter what he does. But again, I don't know any idea what the NFL's doing, so I don't get the world of sports. I know a lot more about this like theater stuff.
Also going to be interesting because one of the big things that people do is it's not necessarily that they're saying the reason why he's out is because of the kneeling. The big thing is that's been a deflection. You know, and the NFL itself has denied that there's been any blackballing or conspiring against Kaepernick or Eric Reed. They had the grievance that was dropped because they came to a settlement. But a lot of fans are saying, they're not saying, oh, he should be out of the league because he kneeled. They are saying he's out because he wasn't skilled enough. It should be based on merit. And that's why. But again, now there's of course talk, and a lot of, you know, some players have stepped up and said there's a lot of trash quarterbacks that, you know, again, it's kind of the idea of where you have to work twice as hard to get half as far, you know, as someone that isn't part of the majority. And that's been the case if you look at the leash in terms of quarterbacks, in terms of how a black quarterback performs versus a white quarterback. You had a guy like Nathan Peterman who in his first start, they benched Tyrod Taylor, black quarterback for Buffalo at halftime. And then Nate Peterman proceeded to throw 5 interceptions, broke the record for the most interceptions, including, I think, 1 pick 6. And so he actually threw more touchdowns to the other team. And Tyrod Taylor did not, they started the next game, they started Peterman again. And it took them a while to put Tyrod Taylor back. And then Tyrod Taylor ended up getting cut, going to Cleveland. Nathan Peterman eventually got cut. I think he got cut the year after, but then he ended up getting signed. This was all while Kaepernick was still looking for employment. And so there is, you know, people saying, okay, if it's about merit, are you really saying guys like Nathan Peterman are better than Kaepernick, who, sure, he might have taken a step back, but he did lead a team to an NFC championship game. Now, it's going to be interesting because I think a lot of people are going to be rooting for him to fail because he's been out of the league 3 years. Say he does sign, he's probably going to be a backup. If he's not a backup, say he starts, then it comes to the question, it's going to be more than just him being on a roster. if he does not play well, it almost takes away from the message. And I'm not saying it's fair, but it's just the case of the matter. It's like the Rooney Rule. That's another thing, NFL, and I'm not really sure. I'm not familiar with y'all and your interests, so I'll provide some
I don't
background
know
with the
anything
Rooney
about
Rule.
sports, but please.
Okay, yeah, then I'll provide as much context as I can. Sorry, I'm kind of a sports nut. The Rooney Rule was put in place, I forgot how many years back, but it was for coaching and coaching staff. The idea was they're considering the league is, as black players increased in the player field, there weren't any coaches that were black. And so it was put into place. The idea was you were required, whenever interviewing for a head coaching role, you were required to interview at least one black or non-white interview applicant. Otherwise, there's an investigation. And so that's, through that is how, like, Mike Tomlin got his position as the Steelers coach. And there's been a few other successes from that program, but there's also been a lot of flaws. It's easy to say almost, tokenism, where it's, let's just grab, let's grab Joe. He's black. Let's just interview him, get it over with. All right, cool. We've interviewed our black guy. Time to actually find who we're going to hire for coach. A lot of times you see it, and there's controversy because a coach will get fired, and then immediately another team that has an opening hires that coach. And then the question is, okay, wait, how did you have the time to hire or interview a black coach when you're already hiring this guy? So there's been a lot of issues. They're considering now, with the recent BLM movement and stuff, revising the rule. But this rule will provide incentives for teams that ultimately hire I think black assistant. I don't know if assistant coaches are included, but at least a black head coach. So say you have an opening, you hire a black head coach, you would be granted either extra a break on your cap, a salary cap, which would allow you to sign players for more, etc. And so that's raised a lot of criticism amongst, white fans and whatnot, saying this should be, hiring a coach should be about merit. He should be a good coach. Now they're just going to hire black people because they get extra draft picks. It's not about merit anymore. It's incentive. And I can almost see their point, because, and it's tough, right? It's with the affirmative action where the intentions are good. And I think there's a role where having these policies in place to encourage diversity are important, but it also shows that it's interesting how when these are in place, yet then there's still going to be pushback, and it ends up reflecting upon the person who benefits from that, right? Y'all go to a very, prestigious university. Zachary, I'm sure you've heard this. I know it happened a lot at Dartmouth, where there are conversations where it's basically you see a black athlete or you see a black student on campus, and it was like, the white students there, they automatically assume that's an affirmative action student, where that, may or may not be the case based on the scores, but they automatically assume that, and it has its negative implications. So it's interesting in terms of institutional policies. Like, my question, and I do not have an answer here, because I agree with Jorge, it's not, it's tough to get it right. I don't think there's a lot of answer, but the intention's important. I think, either way, it may be a flawed system, but at least you're moving in direction, right? With the Rooney Rule, without the Rooney Rule, you wouldn't have Mike Tomlin. There's been a ton of failures, but Mike Tomlin has been a success. Now, we shouldn't just point at it and say, all right, we're good, we don't need the Rooney Rule. We need to expand on it, but it would be interesting to have the conversation. I need to head out soon, but I just wanted to paint more in terms of
Wait, Faze, right?
Yeah. What's up?
Oh, what is the Rooney Rule? I'm sorry.
Oh, no worries. Yeah. This was sorry. I kind of went on a rant.
I came in late, so I was like, listen.
The Rooney Rule, just like a quick TLDR, was a policy put in place to encourage the hiring of minority coaches in the NFL. Basically, as the presence of black players increased, there was not an equal increase in terms of hiring in the executive positions. So it applies to coaches and executives. The idea is you're required to, whenever there's an opening, say a coach gets fired, you are required to interview at least one non-white coach in order for it to be seen as a clean process. That has led to some coaches, such as the Pittsburgh Steelers coach, Mike Tomlin, who's one of the winningest active coaches currently. But there's also been a lot of flaws where then the teams pick out a token where they're like, oh, let's interview him real quick just to get out of the way so we can hire the coach we really want. I was talking about it as in response, we talked about Cap on an individual level in terms of his situation, and I was talking about on an institutional level in terms of as organizations and corporations try to get this right or try to move in the right direction, how even policies with good intentions can lead to negative backlash, and how it's oftentimes there are flaws and loopholes that people find to get around and get manipulated. They're recently proposing to the Rooney Rule adding incentives for teams that do end up hiring Black coaches or executives, where if you hire one, you get additional draft picks, or you get increased breaks on your salary cap, which would allow you to sign players for more so you can retain your better players. And so a lot of criticism has been, by doing that, you're not hiring based on merit. You're hiring, the teams are going to be like, oh, we want that extra draft pick. Oh, we don't have enough money.
This was what you were saying about tokenism.
Yeah. So what I was saying is that the thing is, it's the intentions are there, but it's interesting where even within it could be manipulated in terms of tokenism, where they take advantage of it for ulterior motives, exterior motives. But then also from the outside, again, NFL fans have been very vocal in general about Cap. But you have other fans who are like, now, whenever they see a Black coach, they're not going to think merit. They're going to think, oh, he's hired because of this. The team wanted incentives, whether that is true or not. And I was comparing that to affirmative action, where on prestigious university campuses where there's still a minority of POC, people look like white people look, and they tend to say, hey, that person is an affirmative action student, without knowing what their grades were, what their standardized testing is. They just assume affirmative action is a policy. That's what allowed Black people, brown people to get into this school.
I see. Well, hi guys. I'm sorry for joining in late.
You're good.
I didn't want to speak over you either because I'm glad you actually talked about it.
Yeah, I think that's a very important topic to look at, like, because it's not something that's brought up very often in regards to like the general conversation of race. Like, it is. I think it's very important to say like everyone deserves like equal opportunity to be included, but like we need to attack the systematic like oppression of darker skinned people, like regardless of their ethnicity, like because like Muslim people also, like Asian people, Hispanic people also, just as like not as much as Black people, but certainly like experience that struggle that they look at, not as badly here in Miami specifically, but you look at like almost any university, as you said, it's all that affirmative action mindset. So what you like, I think like setting up that system is important, but at the same time, setting up that system causes problems. So yeah, no, that was a very, very valuable like thing to discuss. And I think personally, at least, like while it is problematic, like in the way that people assume these things, it's necessary, you know, because the system is so stacked against people that aren't like perfectly Caucasian, quote unquote, that like this affirmative action, these rules to encourage people to break the mold, they benefit more than they hurt. Again, it's part of what I said previously, that like taking a step, like even if it's theoretically in the wrong direction, is a step, you know, and it gets the conversation moving. And the more rules that we put in place to destroy that systematic oppression, the more rules and like we get to support people that need support instead of the people that have been supported for eons and eons without need. But yeah.
I think something really important too is that fact of taking steps, that once a system is in place, it doesn't mean that that system doesn't need any fixing.
Yeah.
And a lot of people have that mindset with a lot of things, but I wanted to segue a little bit into what a lot of people dub as modern day slavery. First off, the fact that a lot of people didn't even know Juneteenth was a thing, didn't understand the importance of it, and also tried to make it this big political fight about which party was better. The whole point is that that was when news reached Texas, and the last slaves who were like kept as slaves were freed. It doesn't matter what you want to think about who did it and who did it better. The fact is that's when it happened. Not when the Emancipation Proclamation was sent out. It wasn't immediate, and that's a huge, huge thing. But in terms of this modern day slavery, I read this to you guys earlier, but I want to read it again, just to get it word for word. In the 13th Amendment, neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for crime.
Oh, perfect.
That is so important. Because people will find loopholes in anything, and it expressly gives them one. When they wrote that, they wrote an excuse. It is essentially saying that you cannot force people into labor, but if they commit a crime, then you can.
So basically jail.
Yes. And if you look
I
at the
can tell you-
incarceration rates between our country and the others, we lead by a whole lot. And
I
when
can
you
tell
look
you
at the
this
numbers,
from experience. Oh, sorry. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
no, I was. What were you saying?
I can tell you this from experience because I've had a lot of family members go into jail on the basis of like, okay, because you bring up the whole like labor thing, and I've had already about 2 family members go in to do time for a crime that's like, when a white man commits this crime, it's all okay and dandy. Like he can make a business off of it. He can go to Colorado and open up a weed store. But God forbid a Cuban man has a plant of it somewhere. Oh shit. I'm sorry. It's just like I've always thought it's not just him. It's about like a lot of people. It's so many people in the system. And it boggles me. It drives me nuts how it's literally they literally keep these people for victimless crimes, and yet rapists and these people walk around all day. These, the Brock Turner thing. I don't know. The whole jail thing kind of like affects me in a really negative way. It's hard to explain.
Yeah, it happens a lot with people being in similar cases, but the person who is ethnic tends to be arrested for it. That with the incarceration thing, though, like I will read directly from this chart, which they did it by number of people incarcerated per 100,000 in each racial group. The highest, by far, is black people at 2,306.
Isn't that the whole mass incarceration? What they
Yes.
mentioned and things like that?
Yes.
That is modern.
So
Yeah, that is
the
absolutely
second
modern
one
slavery.
is 1,291 for American Indians or Alaskan Natives. The third is 1,017 with Native Hawaiian or Pacific Islander. The next one is 831 Latinx. 450 for white people, and 115 for Asians. The population of white people in this country is around 70%, 450. 13% for black population, 2,306. That is at least 4 times, maybe, I think around 5 times as much.
450
And
for white people?
love to throw around this thing of, well, black people commit more crime. And I do not have time to post all of the articles that I have disproving this argument. But first off, the fact that black on black crime is only ever brought up against BLM things, yet no one ever talks about white on white crime because the vast majority of pedophiles and school shooters and rapists are. But that's beside the point.
Never killed another black man for being black.
Yes, but the big thing I want to talk about in like terms of the incarceration is those are crimes that are recorded. Like you said, a white man who happens to have a plant that creates that good marijuana can make a business out of it. But if a colored man gets fined with it, they are jailed for several decades in some cases. It is the same issue, like, a lot on our campus specifically. I'm sure a lot of us can, like, rattle off a whole bunch of Caucasian people who are actively and openly doing things like cocaine on a daily basis. I have seen these people get in trouble with the cops, and all they ever get is a warning. But if a colored person is seen doing that, they are immediately arrested for it. That is why black on black crime is so much bigger. It's not the sole purpose of we commit it so much more than everybody. It's we get documented for it so much more than anybody else. And a large part of that is because of that loophole in the 13th Amendment. They attack these communities which are generally poor due to redlining. Please look it up, because some of you don't know what that is. And so these black communities have a lot of vulnerable people that can be arrested and put in jail, and then they're forced to do this labor. That is all tied together. It's not just circumstance that for these specific things black people lead. But when I go and look on the FBI charts of like which ethnic groups lead in a majority of crimes, the ones that we lead in are the ones that are so much brought up, like incarcerations, and the ones that we don't lead in, that like the black community is even like lower than some other communities other than just white, yet we still have more arrests for it. It doesn't make any sense that we would still be like, that black people would be put into prison so much more if we're committing those things so aggressively less. And it's because white people, most of the time, of course this doesn't happen for everybody, there are cases where they punish people fairly, and it should be done for everyone. But there are a lot of cases where if they are brought in, they pay a fine, or they do some community service, whereas some black people, like say the person who was sexually abused and killed their sexual abuser, who is now going to be put away for jail for several years, is locked up. And someone who has a plethora of evidence against them raping a girl behind a dumpster is now walking free because, oh God, let's not ruin his career.
See, why is that not considered? Why is that not considered like, you know, what is that word that people always use when they shoot some self-defense? Why isn't that self-defense?
So I've only ever, and this is again like a very personal observation, the only time I've ever seen someone use self-defense to justify a murder is when they are talking about police officers. I have never, even people who are in full support of the fact that like the person who killed their sexual, yes, I in that case I've talked to people, and when they talk about it, they don't label it as self-defense at all. They just say it's like something she needed to do or like whatever. But the term self-defense itself, I like in terms of like this whole like killing and getting arrested for it, I've only ever seen it happen with police officers. And again, that's just from conversations and stuff I've had over years. So I don't know if that's a vast majority of things, but it is very concerning that I know people who will look at that as different. Like they'll consider the Rayshard Brooks as a self-defense case, but not that woman killing someone who was sexually abusing her for such a long time. It blows my mind.
I wouldn't say self-defense, but I would say it's some kind of like, not retaliation, but like, you know, if I have to live the rest of my life waking up in the middle of the night because you did something to me and I can't sleep without thinking someone's going to break into my window, I don't know. It feels justified. It feels like if no one else is going to help this person. Mm-hmm. Yeah, the whole rape thing in America is another topic for another day.
I think one of the biggest things that I want to like have this conversation with so many different people is if we are going to treat it as a crime and fully say that it's black people who did it, they committed a crime, then we need to charge the other people who do that the same. If we are going to say that a black kid who was smoking marijuana behind a high school can be arrested for a decade, then I don't want to see a single college person get in trouble for popping Molly and get like released with a warning. Then we should punish it all as a crime, or you need to stop punishing specific people for it and letting other people off the hook. It can't be by situation if it's going to be the exact same thing. And it's a very similar thing with Rayshard Brooks' case of the problem with that, and I think Trevor Noah did a great job of summing it up, is it is a mess. It is a huge, huge mess. Because yes, he fought against police officers, which is not a very wise thing to do. But there's several things that you have to look at it, because this is just not an average, everyday case that happened. And one of the biggest things is people are drawing parallels between that and a case, I think in February, in Milwaukee, of this white man who police were called on him because he assaulted someone else. And when the cops got there, he fought the police officers. He shot one taser into one officer, took the taser of another, and tried to shoot the second. They arrested him without any serious bodily harm. And he was actively trying to fight these police officers and try to do harm upon these men. But with Rayshard's case, of course we don't know what he was thinking. We don't know what his intentions were, but he was running away from the police officers as opposed to charging towards them. And the result of it was so unbelievably different. He died. So of course we're going to draw parallels, especially with everything going on. And because there's so many things going on, a lot of people way more educated in these things than me have been discussing, let's just stop for a second about thinking how it ended and consider why it started the way it did.
Zai, if you don't mind, would you tell me what exactly happened with Rayshard Brooks? Because I've gotten very minor details about it, and
so
every time someone tells me about it, the story is foggy, so I would like to know what happened.
He fell asleep in a Wendy's drive-thru, and Wendy's employees called saying, hey, we're concerned that this person's asleep, because like cars were driving around him. It was very abnormal. The first police officer showed up. He asked Rayshard, like, hey, are you good? Like, he woke him up, said, hey, are you good? Can you pull over for me? Police officer started walking back to his car. He turns around. Rayshard was asleep again. So he comes back and he says, hey, I need you to pull, like, over to the side for me. So he does. There's several minutes of questioning, asking what he was doing. Rayshard admitted that he had drank a little bit. Of course, he was doing the thing that every drunk person was like, oh, I didn't drink that much. But he admitted that he had some drinks. A second officer came. The first explained what happened, why he was called. Totally normal. They did a breathalyzer and tested him, like had him like walk in place, stuff like that. Even asked like where he thought he was, and he thought he was in a place that he had passed. So clearly not there. Then there was a several amount of time. Then they finished up the testing. Like there was a couple of minutes that passed. They finished up the testing. Came back positive. He was drunk. They kept questioning him again. One of the points that a lot of articles will point out is that he said his sister, I believe it was his sister's place, is like nearby. He said, I can go walk to it. You can keep the car, whatever. The officer said no. Another few minutes of questioning and stuff like that. And then the first officer there says, all right, we're going to put you under arrest, and starts to put him in handcuffs, and Rayshard starts to fight. And during the scuffle, they're tackling him. The second officer pulls out his taser and tries to discharge it. Rayshard takes it from the man's hand, wrestles it out of him. When he breaks free, he's running away. As he passes like the first car in the drive-thru, as he's running, he goes like this and discharges the taser at the cop. The first officer who arrived on the scene was the one who was chasing him. The other was on the ground. He starts chasing Rayshard. He pulls out his taser. When Brooks fires the taser that he had from officer number 2, the officer switches to his gun and shoots him, I think, twice in the back. And then he died later in the hospital.
That is a lot to unpack.
Yes. And that's the big problem of it, is that when we're protesting all this stuff, to have a case that's not quote unquote as clear cut as other things makes it very hard, because now people are latching onto this as a thing of like, well, everyone's forcing race onto this, so they're just forcing race into everything else. And also the argument of this wasn't a racial thing. And I think it was. I personally do 100% believe it was, but not in the same case of this cop murdered him because he is black. It's the case of the way they went about this was because of race. That they understand what is going on. The cops in Brooks, everybody knows what's going on. Every state has been marching, a dozen countries. And of course, we don't know what they were thinking during all of this, and we don't know their intentions behind it.
Were they just
said word? But when going to this,
were they just
what?
Were they just questioning him like extensively for no reason?
The whole interaction took 40 minutes, and it's an arguable case of whether or not it was for no reason or not. That's why it's so messy. Is like a lot of it could be interpreted different ways, but in terms of handling the situation with someone who was being compliant the entire time, it admitted he was drinking, admitted, like, he tried to identify where he was, and then he just went, I don't know, officer. Like, he was a very reasonable
he just
drunk.
needed a little bit of help.
If you know all these tensions are going on, if you know all these black people are so terrified of being pulled over and stuff like that, and as a cop, if you're so scared of being in that situation where you can get in trouble because people will come and attack you, one would expect them to treat the situation with caution. But from the video footage, it wasn't. And it was drawn out very long for a situation that, if they were going to arrest him, didn't need to take that long to reach that point, especially since the breathalyzer was tested and proven a good chunk of time before they tried to put him in cuffs. But they let it play out for so long that tensions for all of them grew to a head. And that's why I think the race plays into it. Because there's so many times that cops are killing for racial things. So that's why they're like this mindset and this like idea of what could or could not happen was in everyone's heads when this happened. So it is very much a racial thing, but it's not a case of this man killed him because he's black. That's I don't believe is true at all. But it's important to realize that without all these other racial cases, it may not have exploded to the point it did, and even if it did, it can be argued either way. But the cops knew what's going on with this country and what all these the colored people and what their fear is, and they still allowed it to take so much time for a decision that they were clearly going to make as soon as that breathalyzer was done. It's a matter of, if you're going to do it, and they took a long time to do it, and regardless of what race you are, if it took that long, I fully believe that people would start to panic. And there's been other cases of that with different ethnicities all over, of like something that shouldn't take that long and it gets so heated because it's drawn out.
But couldn't you argue that if they went quick, that it could have equally, because oftentimes the criticism is people are rushing to judgment and they're acting too rashly where they're not taking the time. I haven't seen the footage and whatnot, and I'm not sure what the policy is, but if they immediately said, oh, you're drunk, and you put them in handcuffs, or tried to put them in handcuffs, I'm not sure if that would have changed how people were seeing the situation.
I think it would. One of the biggest things people like keep bringing up is like they had no grounds to arrest him because I don't know how true this is, but like something about like, yeah, he was drunk, but he wasn't posing a threat on the street. I don't know. I think that's such a new point, and it's just people trying to find something to argue.
But asking legal.
Yes, yes, absolutely.
I was talking to my mom about this case like last week because she's an attorney. So I was asking her, I was like, Mom, can you tell me from a legal standpoint, like what chance does he stand against this? Because to me, it's obviously very racially biased in this case. So basically what she said is that it's going to come down to an argument of self-defense, as we were talking about. And so he didn't present deadly force. So there's that. But however, he did aim at a cop. But again, it wasn't with deadly force. So, like you said, I think there's going to be an argument for both ways. But it was a situation that there were no grounds for him to be arrested because he was breaking no law. He was in his car. He wasn't driving it, correct? If he was sitting there sleeping. So it's going to be a tough case because there's going to be arguments made both ways. So it's not a clear-cut thing, unfortunately, but to me it just seems like it's abundantly clear that how given there he wasn't doing anything wrong, he's in a parking lot, he didn't present deadly force, you know.
Um, yeah, a lot of people have brought that up too about like what cops are supposed to like deem as like worthy of.
I don't know, the way it
force.
sounds like he was just drunk and dazed and confused. Like, I don't know, I've been in that situation. They could have handled that so much differently.
Yeah, there's a lot of different ways it could have been handled for both parties. Even someone I had a conversation with was like, well, I was in that situation and they got other people to show up and drove us home. But going back to what you said about like Marcus, about like if they had done it faster, I think clear evidence of like it would have been the same case of the deadly force thing, but also I think there would have been no argument for saying the cops handled it poorly in that case, because the cops came, he would have studied the situation, been like, this man is drunk and needs to be brought in, so he made a decision, and that I think that would resonate a little bit better on this side, especially with like the things like curfew going on and people like arresting during protests, because for those who like agree with like the arrest and stuff, in those cases it's a snap decision. It's this person broke the curfew when they weren't supposed to, so we're going to arrest them. And then it can be argued like, oh, you arrested him because of race. But if he broke free of that, then it would be very much a thing of he wasn't complying with officers. But because it was so drawn out, you see him giving them the answers they need. He didn't lie about anything. He's answering everything honestly. He's doing what they ask him to. He's being very polite. And because of that, that's why I think it's so hard to say that they, like, I think it's feasible to say that they could have handled it a little better. In terms of the excessive force, that's the point that a lot of people are going to be arguing against them for, because they're saying that, like, was the taser grounds for you to respond with a firearm? And one of the things the cops have said is that they can use as much force as like necessary to take them down that is on level or like just above kind of thing. Like, say if someone was trying to beat them with a stick, they can use a taser to take them down so they don't have to get close enough that the person can hit them. Now some people are arguing that because the other man had a taser, that a gun was that reasonable next step up. But after so many other cases of very similar things with people of different race, and they do similar things but constantly and with like more aggression to it, but are never met with that much force, but are responded with in kind, especially since police officers are protected, it's just very hard to see it as like a reasonable thing to say that the firearm was needed, as opposed to firearm was what he wanted to use, if that makes sense. But again, like, it's because it's such a messy situation, there's no clear-cut way to figure this out, and there's a lot of like what ifs and like how they could have done it for both of them. And one of the biggest reasons I hate that so much is because of this messy situation. Now people are going to start attributing that to other situations. Like, someone tried to make the comparison to Tamir Rice, who is a child.
I saw a 4-year-old boy operate an assault rifle perfectly on Twitter. Every time Tamir rights gets brought up, I don't care what anyone says, that 12-year-old boy did not deserve to get shot, period.
The thing is, with that one, that case is that when cops showed up, there was no attempt to arrest him. There was no attempt to assess the situation on their own. Eyewitnesses stay, and I believe it's one of the cases where body cam footage wasn't shown. As soon as they pulled up, they stepped out and fired. And that's very much a case of they went above and beyond for the level of force needed for a child. But now because of Brooks's case, which is so unbelievably messy, and I'm going to keep saying mess because that's what it is. It's a mess. Now it's going to become this issue of if anything else happens further than this, and even the cases that have already happened, people are going to start saying, well, Floyd could have responded better to the cops and been more compliant. Or Breonna Taylor's boyfriend could have just complied with the cops or whatever. And we can, like, there's a lot to discuss with each one of those things, but it's the point of Brooks' case now adds this layer of frustration for everyone.
It's not just, I do need to go soon, so I just want to leave on a couple of points. Speaking off of this one, this is why it's important for people to do their research and due diligence before. There's a few things. One, in terms of this specific issue, one, I see people who repost, like, you look at their Instagram story, they have 20 things in it. And overall, that's not going to, I don't know how many people want to actually pay attention to 20 things, but also makes me question how much of this did they actually look into versus seeing, oh, this is a Black Lives Matter post with information, let me repost. Because I saw one list going through where it was like one of those where it listed, you know, justice for insert name for 25 people. And out of curiosity, I was like, oh, let me just look into some of these cases I don't know. One of the cases that they're asking for justice for was a guy that basically got into a police, or took his car, backed into a police car as they were trying to get him go, and then went and sped up and hit a police officer and put him into the hospital. And then they ended up shooting him after that. They thought the police officer was also presumed dead, but this is one of the guys they're calling for. And I get that, you know, the intentions, and, you know, 9 out of 10 of these people have been killed and there wasn't justice, but just that one drop ruins the whole thing. It's right. You know, the same thing that's been used a lot for describing cops, right? One bad apple spoils the bunch. We have to see that on our side as well as we present information. All it takes is one inconsistency, and that just discredits the opinion. You go to law, and, you know, you go to a jury and you're in a court case and you find out that one piece of evidence has been tampered with. It doesn't matter if you have all the video cameras in the world and the person has a confession that said, I did it. They will point to that one piece of tampered evidence and throw out the entire case. So it's important here, and I'm not saying that it was justified that Brooks died. It is important when we're yelling justice for so-and-so, we know the things and also know how complicated these things can be. And oftentimes we're jumping to conclusions before a decision has even been made. And it's frustrating to see black body after black body after black body get killed with little repercussion, but we also have to remember that we got to be tactical about it. It sucks, but it's just the way it is. And then I just want to go back to other points, and I hope you guys talk about this in terms of intersectionality. I thought it was interesting you talked about the woman who's killed her sexual abuser, and that introduces gender politics as well, where, you know, how often do we see women who are sold into traffic, or they're in prostitution, or they're soliciting, yet they are always the one that goes to jail, but the John who's also committing a crime because he is paying for sex, we don't hear much about it. And oftentimes these are white men in powerful places. Centoya Brown,
hell yeah.
Centoya Brown was, I don't know if you're familiar with her case, Kim Kardashian was fighting for her. She was similar, where she went and she solicited, she received $150, and basically this man attempted to kidnap her, I believe, or she was in fear for her life, killed him. She was in jail for 15 years, but now she's been released, I'm hoping that gives precedent for this other young lady that's in a similar predicament. Who knows? We'll see. But that's interesting. And then I want to just go back 2 steps further in terms of drug usage, which I thought was a great point, because we all know a lot of comments I see, you know, with the mass incarceration rate is well, if they didn't want to be in jail, they shouldn't commit crimes. And it's important that we're straight up. We don't want to. It is true that in terms of black, it's a stupid term, but it's true that there is a lot of violence and gun violence in predominantly black neighborhoods. It exists, but you're right. A lot of people bring it up as a counter argument. What I've learned as an interesting tactic is I tell them it's so great to see that you're passionate about, the amount of black bodies killed in this. I can't wait to see the resources you're providing and the donations you're putting in to helping stop these. And oftentimes you'll see they go quiet, which helps lean it out because it's important. Like, there needs to be accountability in all communities. It is true there are issues in the black community that need to be addressed, but oftentimes people that are saying this don't really care about the black community. But I wanted to say,
and we are focusing on it.
Exactly. Yeah, they're using it as a deflection tactic.
Like, BLM has made organizations to specifically help with that.
Correct. Yeah. People don't. It's just because it's not a focus. It's not that it's not happening. It's just that people aren't paying attention. But in terms of socioeconomic things, right? We talk about college drug use, rampant everywhere, right? Is important. Yes, there's definitely race things. I'm sure if one of y'all in one of your white counterparts, like white men, were partaking in drugs and police showed up, you might be treated differently. However, overall, looking at colleges, I guarantee you that someone getting caught doing cocaine on a college campus versus getting caught in like the street just somewhere in a city or whatever doing cocaine will be treated very differently regardless of race, just because, again, socioeconomic status. Not saying, and again, I don't know all y'all's situations, financial situations, so I'm not speaking to that, but in general, college is considered prestigious. College is considered a place of the elite where you go to advance yourself. Someone that's in college is held differently than someone that's hanging out in their neighborhood, especially in inner cities, right? Regardless of whether that's where you came from. I know there's been situations where people have changed how they interact with me once I told them I went to an Ivy League school. Now, because of that, we have to think about how things are being treated, where look at the campus makeup, right? Who is being granted more opportunities to go to said colleges, to give them the privilege of, if then they do drug use and it's like, oh, he was just a college student, then they have a lesser penalty. Probably mostly white people or people of privilege or people that were born into wealth, right? And so now you have these people who don't have those opportunities, largely communities of color, the minority, who don't have access to these elite institutions typically. And so when they're doing the same thing, you mentioned marijuana, they're often the ones that face the brunt of the punishment. Also, then in terms of socioeconomic, think about, sometimes it's not that they immediately go to jail. It's not, oh, you did drugs, you go to jail. Sometimes it's, you did drugs, or we've caught you with this, or you did this, you need to pay a $500 fine or whatever the fine is. Then in these situations where it's poor family, poor community, they're not able to pay that fine. Then it's okay, you either get another fine because you didn't pay your fine, or you get in trouble, we're putting you in a jail for avoiding paying the fine. And so it's complex, and it's important to address how all these factors play on each other, rather than, again, it's stupid, but rather than making it black or white, it's oftentimes very complex, and I hope you dive into that. Of course, it's tough because, again, it's important to have these conversations with people who are actually there. And it's tough to do because we all live in our own bubbles. Like, Miami's a bubble in itself where you meet certain people. Dartmouth was a bubble. Your respective communities are bubbles. And it's tough to sometimes break out of those because it's a really active process. But again, I'm glad y'all are taking the first step in terms of having conversations here. I hope you continue to learn from each other. You guys are doing great. It's good to see this as an old lad myself relative to y'all. Don't want to take more of your time here. Good stuff. I'm out. Shameless plug. Listen to my music. My brother could put you on, but hope you, Zachary, you're muted. I don't know where you're going on.
Oh my God. I'll share your Insta and Spotify to them later.
Sure. Yeah. Shameless plug. But hey, nice meeting y'all. Hope you have continue this productive conversation, and hopefully I'll see y'all again. Have a good night.
Take care.
Thanks for joining us.
He brought up the whole
Wait, before
the
you
whole
go,
like.
I also have to depart. I also want to say thank you.
Yeah, sure thing.
Very valuable experience. Glad to be back. I'm going to keep coming back. It's
Thanks, man.
important to be a part of the community. Help. Keep helping.
Have a good one.
Right back.
He had mentioned parties earlier about how like comparing let's say like okay, because I went to one party, one. But and it was something Katie did, and I remember I went, and it was in Coral Gables, and I don't know what you guys think about Coral Gables. I see Coral Gables as kind of a frou like, I don't know, rich kid neighborhood. No offense if you're a rich kid. If you're a rich kid, I fuck with you. But like, I don't know. I went to a party there, and there's a bunch of people, and we're having fun, and there's loud music, and drug usage, and we're having fun, and nothing happens. But then I go to say like a party with my friends, and we get an Airbnb at somewhere, somewhere nearby, and yet we don't get ignored. We don't, people don't see the party, and they go, oh, just a bunch of kids having fun. They're like, oh, these fucking hooligans or whatever. I don't know.
It's a matter of the place that you are is like privileged, because I think part of the reason that like our university specifically is because they know that they're university kids at the University of Miami, this school which like a lot of people know and is like revered for different things. But if it happens like further away, like more in the Miami community itself, they will latch onto that. But I think that plays into the whole case of what Marcus was talking about with the difference between like people at universities and people living in everyday life who are not currently college students. It's this thing of like, regardless of the fact that we may not get in as easily as some other Caucasian people, we're still college students, so there's a little bit of leeway that we have over someone who, say, is currently working, let's say, is a sanitation clean, like who's a janitor or something like that. We're gonna have a little bit more leeway with police officers than they will, and it's frustrating because then people can put the whole spin on it that it's solely because of the whole college student thing that some people are getting in trouble, instead of looking at the fact that race does play a part into that in both cases.
I got a question for you.
Yes.
And this is not to stir any controversy or to stir anything, but what do you personally? Do you think that classism and racism to some extent go kind of hand in hand?
Absolutely, and a lot of it comes from redlining. A lot of people love to talk about, well, this black person did it, so everyone has equal opportunity. But when you get down to the nitty and gritty, and I have many articles and stuff about this that have been studied for years, not just recently, this isn't like some new fad, about how primarily black communities are so undereducated and underfunded compared to normal white communities. And when you have less funding, when you have less of an education, it is so much harder to gain the chance to grow and have these opportunities. And a lot of times, these black people that we see like succeeding are those people who have the chance to live in quote-unquote white communities. Like, I 100% believe that if I had stayed in some of the communities I lived in, if I didn't have a parent who was part of the military and we got to move to places that were primarily white and noticed by a lot of other places, I would not have gotten as far as I have. And I don't think I would be able to get any further either. And it's because I was within that community. So when the majority of black people were put by the government long time ago into specific places, and all that funding is taken, like say how Chicago had to shut down 50 schools because the budget to police took a lot of money away, then it absolutely plays into race. Race and class is hand in hand. It's not perfect, and there's going to be exceptions on either side. There's going to be white people that are poorer than a lot of other black people. But as a whole, it is easier / different for each of us. And race does play a factor. I 100% believe in that. But
What do you feel about the defunding, or not defunding, but the lack of, like, I don't know, emphasis on theater in primarily Black communities? Because I feel like there's not enough theater going on for that. Like, people on purpose don't fund that department. You know what I mean?
What's funny is, like, theater is its own separate argument. Because right now, Broadway's being challenged a lot for a lot of issues they have with race. And that's an entirely different argument, but I think something important to know about art programs and stuff and why they're so important. A lot of white people have access to them. And part of the reason why we get so mad because we see white casts doing ethnic shows is because the places that have ethnic people don't have the programs and the funding to be able to put on shows. So when it comes down to it, when these schools are fighting over which, like, you know, the high school theater of like, oh, well, this school took the play we wanted to do, but no one's doing The Color Purple, so let's all do it with a bunch of Caucasian kids, it's because there's no other schools that are primarily black and have a lot of black people that can do that show because they don't have the funding for their theater program. And it's like that for a lot of different art mediums.
There are so many white
but specific,
shows
yeah,
that they can do.
Yes, and that's another thing. If another problem with theater is that people love to latch on to the popular ethnic shows because they're popular ethnic shows, and they don't realize why they're popular to begin with. Like, it's the problem of an ethnic show should not be famous because it's ethnic. And that's something that we're trying to figure out.
It frustrates me because I see a lot, like, okay, the topic of Hairspray and the topic of, like, let's say, In the Heights. People get heated when they can't use these songs at auditions from these musicals, but it's like, dude, look at all these musicals here to the left.
But it's a case of it's so popular and people want to do it because it's such pretty music and stuff. But that's the thing.
Girl, do a Vita.
There are so many black shows that didn't make its gain because it wasn't so good that people put it forward. But there's so many mediocre and really bad white shows. That's another thing. It's like a lot of these ethnic shows are so good. Like, whether or not you like rap, you can agree that In the Heights is written so beautifully. And part of this because it draws into the culture so well. But that's why it got popular. Because Lin-Manuel Miranda did such a great job of writing that show and not, like, stereotyping the culture in any way. But if someone else was to try to write a show that has, like, the same culture and stuff, and it was just, like, you know, kind of like generic whatever music, it would never take off. And that's another issue. But that's why everyone loves them so much, and why everyone wants to do it, because they are so good, but it's only because the good ones are the ones that make it through. Like, Color Purple is through because it's an incredible show. Hamilton, it's an incredible show. I can't think of any ethnic shows that arguably are critically acclaimed to just be
I also want to say, just like in the cases of ethnic shows, like for me, I'm mostly speaking on In the Heights because I haven't seen The Color Purple. I haven't. I want to, but there's also the issue like it's musical theater, but they take influences from like different genres of music that are more associated with communities of color. Like, you know, In the Heights definitely taking like different Latin styles and putting them in, but in like, I think a reason why they're so popular is because they take those styles that are so different, but they package it in a way that's like easier to consume for a majority white audience, because that's the people going to see it on Broadway. Ethnic. Yeah.
That's the thing. Because in a lot of like primarily white shows, when there's ethnic characters, sometimes their music is very, very different. So a lot of the music has been very much like put through a Caucasian filter before it's thrown out.
Like, we can have a little Spanish, but not too much Spanish, or else,
I think you're right,
fans
Zai,
might not sing along.
Yeah.
You can't compare freaking, the genius behind, like, In the Heights and Hamilton and Color Purple, and even Once on This Island, like, all these, like, ethnic heavy shows, to some shit like Be More Chill. No offense to anybody who likes Be More Chill.
I like Be More Chill.
Well, I'll put it in this way. I'll put it this way.
Come on.
Come on.
In the Heights will never ever be compared to SpongeBob the Musical.
We
but
can
we,
talk
but
about
we will
SpongeBob.
never, but we will never see a SpongeBob the Musical level show that is about ethnic people, because no one will go and see a show that is ethnic unless it is like quote unquote perfect. I'm gonna go ahead and like. Sorry, I just want to wrap this up because it is getting long.
Yeah.
That's the problem. There's so many things to talk about.
Yeah.
You know
but
what?
one-
Yeah, like I
Let's
could go on
go.
whole rants about like affirmative action and not
Oh,
talking
yes.
about handcuffs.
I'm glad I got to talk to someone about this though, because like I don't know, I feel
I think that's
feel
an entire separate conversation that definitely needs to be had about
I
like.
feel like in this time, Latinos should stand a lot in solidarity with what's going on, and I don't see a lot of that from my community. So I feel really
That's
disgusted
something I
about
wanted to talk about next week. Is like,
Well-
what about
I'll
each
jump
group
in.
and how they support each other? But I want to leave with just this like little nugget, and this is something that should be talked about too. But my brother just sent me this. Something that we don't think about a lot when it comes to like these incarcerations and stuff is the cost of bond, because poor people cannot afford to pay it. So they
And we
target
call
poor
that
people.
poverty.
It's a way of extortion. And again, when you look at it, the majority of poor people are going to be in places that are very black dominant.
That's how they
It's
keep.
why
That's
it's
how they
why
keep it in one
that
spot.
celebrity that cheated her daughter into college was able to get off because she can pay these kind of things. But then the mother who lied about, I believe it was a high school, to get her kid in couldn't. But it's important to look like there are connections between things, and it's very important to look at how these connections affect each thing. Like why redlining affected the incarceration rates, why the crime statistics look the way they do. But a lot of people don't want to attribute all these different things, they just use it as separate argumentative pieces. And that is true of both people who believe that there is problems with it and people who do believe there aren't. A lot of people on both of those sides are not layering them together because, again, like I said, Brooks' case is a mess, but so is this entire thing. It has been one big mess that has happened for hundreds of years. And it cannot be solved by doing one specific little thing. And that's why it's so much of a problem. But yeah, so it is important to think about all these things and how it could or could not relate to each other. Goodbye.
Later.